All right, so this one we might be on different levels with, which is why I want to do this video instead of doing it in class. So we're going to watch this video individually, and this way, if you guys need to pause, stop, ask me questions individually, you can. And if you get it, then you can just go ahead and go straight through. And this way, we can kind of maybe not waste some people's times, but give people the chance, an opportunity to ask for help as they need it. So what our goal is, or what we're learning in this video, is absolute value equations. And at the end of this, these are the two things that you hopefully know. You know what absolute value means if you don't already, and then you know how to solve absolute value equations, and not necessarily the most challenging ones right now, but kind of the middle pack to, I would say, maybe the developing and the approaching questions right now, not necessarily the mastery. But at the end of this video, if you don't know what absolute value means, then you have to make sure you ask me that. If at the end of this video you're still unsure of how to solve an absolute value equation, then make sure you're getting the help you need, because these are two things that when you're finished, you should go back and say, yes, I understand this, and yes, I can do this. All right, so we're just going to go through a couple things first before we get into some of the problems, and then we'll go from there. All right, so first off, before we start to solve any equations, we need to know what absolute value means, because without understanding this, we're not going to be able to set up the equations the way that we need to. And the absolute value of a number is the distance that number is from zero. And since we're measuring distance, that means that our answers are always going to be positive, because you would never call up a friend and say, hey, I'm negative 2 kilometers away from you. It just doesn't make sense. When we're dealing with distance and how far something is, it's 2 kilometers, regardless of which way we're coming from. So if I were to say, what is the absolute value of 3? Well, the way that we denote absolute value is this symbol here. It's the 2 bars. So I would say, well, what is the absolute value of 3? And if we have a number line, we can count it. It's 1, 2, 3 units away from 0. So the absolute value of 3 is 3. It doesn't matter that we're counting to the left to get to 0, because we're just saying, well, how far away is it? What is the distance? So it must be positive. And same thing, if I said, okay, well, what is the absolute value of negative 3? Well, we would denote that by the absolute value of negative 3. And it doesn't matter here. I'm also counting 1, 2, 3 units away from 0. So even though that number was negative 3, the absolute value of it is still 3, because we're measuring how far away, what is the distance that number is from 0. So you have to truly understand that in order to be able to start solving these equations. You have to understand that a negative 3 and a positive 3, the absolute value of it is both 3, because they're both the same distance away from 0. So even though it's a negative 3, and since the absolute value is dealing with distance, we get a positive 3 as our answer. And a positive 3, it's a positive 3 as our answer when taking the absolute value away as well, because it is the distance from 0. All right, so real quick, if I give you this problem, then what is the absolute value of negative 6? You should right away know, okay, well, negative 6 is 6 units away from 0. We don't have to count. And since it's absolute value, we know it's going to give us a positive answer. So in this one here, what is the absolute value of 6? Well, same thing. 6 is also 6 units away from 0. And since we're dealing with the distance, we know that our answer is positive. So now, what if I gave you, though, what is the absolute value of what number, x, is equal to 6? So in this case, we know that there are two numbers that are going to be 6 units away from 0 as well. We just went through this. Well, negative 6 is 6 units away from 0, and so is positive 6. So our absolute value answers can generate as many as 2 solutions. Sometimes it'll be 1, and that's only when our absolute value is 0. Sometimes there'll be no solution. We'll talk about that in the future. But it's going to generate most 95% of the time, 99% of the time, going to generate 2 answers, because this x, we know that the absolute value of 6 is equal to 6, and we know that the absolute value of negative 6 is equal to 6. So it's going to generate 2 solutions for us, because we can have a positive and a negative 6 inside that absolute value and still generate 6 as an answer. All right, so that is the most important thing. So if you do not understand that, please pause the video and ask me to come and explain it to you again. All right, so now we're going to take this one step further and start solving some problems with it. And then that'll be it for this video. All right, so these are some of the more basic questions, and these are really just developing. So these are ones that you all will be expected to be able to answer. So the way that you do this is, first off, we look and say, okay, the absolute value of x is equal to 8. Well, I know that the absolute value of 8 and the absolute value of negative 8 is both going to be equal to positive 8. So what we're going to do here then is we're going to create 2 equations. And we're going to talk about and see later on, not today, But first we need to isolate our absolute value. But once it's isolated, which it is, because now we're saying this number, whatever is inside of this absolute value, is 8 units away from 0. We're going to create two equations. We create where x is just equal to 8. So we just rewrite it like it is without the absolute value, because we know that that number inside the absolute value can be a positive 8 and still give us that answer. And then we're going to create another equation. So we'll write the word or, because we can get two answers now, where x can also be that negative number that it's set equal to, because we know the absolute value of negative 8 is equal to 8. And the absolute value of 8 is also equal to 8. So from doing it like this, it's going to create two different answers, because we know that both a negative 8 and a positive 8 are 8 units away. So when there's nothing being done to it, and it's just like this, it's very basic. So from here, we just say, okay, we isolate our absolute value first, which we have. And then we're saying, okay, well, what number is 15 units away from 0? Well, we know that x can be 15 units away, a positive. So we're just setting it equal like the equation without the absolute value. And then we're going to create our second equation, where now we're going to set that x equal to negative 15. All right, because we know inside that absolute value could be a positive or a negative number and still generate a positive answer at the end once we perform the absolute value. All right, these are the basic ones, and now we're going to take this a little step further. All right, so now inside our absolute value, we have some other operations being done to it. So same thing though, it's the same thought process, is we know that inside this absolute value, it can be a positive 4 or it can be a negative 4. So that means that we need to set whatever is on the inside equal to a positive 4, because that will still give us 4 as our absolute value, and then to a negative 4. So we're going to create two equations from here. Our first one, x over 5 is equal to positive 4. So whenever you're doing this, once you know that you can get a solution, you just rewrite it exactly like it is without the absolute value. And then what's inside the absolute value never changes. That does not change. And then we set it equal to a negative of it as well, because we know that both a positive or a negative 4 can be in there and still give us 4 as our answer. And then we just solve these as individual equations like we've just been doing for the last couple of weeks. Since we're dividing by 5, we multiply by 5 and say, okay, well, x is equal to 20. And then I multiply by 5 and multiply by 5, or x is equal to negative 20. All right, this one just happens to work out that the other ones, it's still the same number but different signs, but don't get in the habit of doing that. Make sure you're solving both of the equations that you set up, because it's not always going to fall like that, like it doesn't on this question 4. All right, so that's solving number 3. Number 4, same thing. I know that ultimately the absolute value of 9 is equal to 9, or the absolute value of negative 9 is equal to 9. So that means this x plus 2 can be positive or negative 9. So I'm going to create x plus 2 is equal to 9. So just once you know that we can get a solution, which we'll talk about tomorrow when you can identify that or not, then we just rewrite it without the absolute value. And then nothing inside the absolute value ever changes. We keep it exactly like it is, but we set it equal to the negative number. So it's negative 9. And then from here, we'll just solve. So we subtract 2. So x is equal to 7. And this is what I mean. Sometimes because when we first learn this, it just happens to always be the positive and negative of the same number. They just get in the habit of writing that. But you'll see in this one, when I subtract 2 here, well, negative 9 minus 2 is not the same as 9 minus 2. So this is now going to be x is equal to negative 11. So make sure that you are solving both of the equations that you create to get to two answers. All right, there's one more question, and then that's it for this video. All right, so this one is just a little bit harder because now we have multi-step equation inside that absolute value. But ultimately, we know that this absolute value of positive 22 gives us 22, or the absolute value of negative 22 also is 22. So nothing changes. We're going to set what's inside, 2x plus 10 equal to 22, because we know that that whole thing can be 22 and still give us 22 as our absolute value, or we set it equal to a negative 22. So when we're doing this, you don't change the inside of your absolute value. We keep that the same. We set it equal to the positive and to the negative of the answer, because we know that both of those will give us the same absolute value. Then we just solve. So I'm going to subtract 10. So 2x is equal to 12. And since we're multiplying, I divide by 2. So x is equal to 6. Here, I subtract 10. 2x is equal to negative 32. Divide by 2. Or x is equal to negative 16. All right, so this would then be our final answer. All right, that is it for this video.